So Salvinia, named after a 17th century Italian scientist, is a gorgeous wee floating fern, indigenous to tropical Americas, but popping up everywhere these days, and just a marvellous little plant. It actually gets more interesting the closer you look at it. You can see the tiny hairs growing along the stems there that then grow onto the leaves. That makes it water resistant, but also stunning in a way that only nature can do. You can see the hairs are minuscule towards the edges of the leaf and form loops as we move back to the more established part of the plant. Just fascinating when you get close enough to see it. So it's a plant that's fine for big tanks, but it's ideal for smaller tanks too because it grows quite small itself. So better tanks and shrimp tanks, probably a nice choice. It grows fast with very little requirement. As long as you've got some nutrients and a bit of light, it will cover the surface and form a mat in no time at all. A helpful little plant then. The more nutrients you got, the quicker it will grow, so it really is good at soaking them up. And if you're maybe battling an algae problem, this is maybe useful because if the plant outcompetes the algae for nutrients, the algae is going to struggle. Also, as the Salvinia makes a big carpet across the top of the surface, it means light's not penetrating down to the bottom of the tank for the algae to use. If you're not so keen for it to take over the whole tank, you can always use one of these feeding rings to create wee barriers. I've got a video on them that I'll link at the end, go into a wee bit more detail about them. But we can use them to create clear areas on the surface. Alternatively, we can keep the plant inside of them. If you just want to grow a wee bit of it, help soak up some of them nutrients without it going over the whole tank. They grow in small clumps off of a central stem before they separate and become their own plant, which is one of the things I prefer to Salvinia over duckweed. I've said a few times, I call Salvinia the Cinderella plant, where the duckweed will be the ugly sisters. Duckweed like this grows much smaller and in much smaller groups. In fact, it can remain single, and if you get all your duckweed out, which is famously difficult to do, and just one leaf remains, it can quickly repopulate entire tanks. Some people never get rid of it, and it's a source of much frustration for them. Salvinia, on the other hand, is much easier to remove because it's slightly bigger and remains connected. I mean, I could probably clear this tank in under a minute if I wanted to and never worry about it again. That's if I wanted to remove it, which I don't. Regardless, we do need to thin it out sometimes and get some of it out of the tank. So if we do, we need to discard of it responsibly. It would be considered an invasive species in most parts of the world and can easily fill waterways very, very quickly. So compost heaps, waste that's carefully discarded, that kind of thing is the way to get rid of this if we must. Burn it if you need to. Just don't let it get into the natural ponds and streams around where you stay. It's easily available these days, and you can get in these nice sweet tissue cultures which ensure there's no pests or algae on them. A cheaper method though would be to ask somebody you know who's got some. I mean, it grows that quickly, they're not going to mind giving you some and will probably be, excited to share some of what they got. It's a great wee plant. If you do choose to do that, just make sure your pal doesn't keep any snails or anything that you wouldn't like hitchhiking over to your tank. And if you're giving somebody some, maybe let them know about it. But, this hobby, in fact, this world's all about helping each other out, isn't it? So, sure folk wouldn't mind sharing some of this plant with you. Salvinia has nice little root systems that hang underneath it, which your shrimp are going to love exploring. Fry are going to love hanging about in there and picking up wee treats that they can find. Even your snails are going to crawl about on them from time to time, so create a bit of interest and security in that way as well. You don't need to keep Salvinia by itself. This is one of my big tanks, and I've got red tiger lotus growing. That's the bigger leaves that you saw there, the lily pad kind of leaves. Then Frogbit is your middle-sized plant there, and Salvinia kind of in between it. I think it makes a nice effect. It's not a plant that enjoys being tossed about and won't do so well in tanks with high amounts of current, but otherwise I can't really think of a drawback. So I hope I've interested you in this wee plant. If you think of anything I've missed, feel free to put it in the comments below, and we'll help out anybody that's thinking about giving it a shot. And I hope you do. Great wee plant, so it is.